In the spring of 2024, Manchester found itself at the centre of a nightmare when parts of a human body started turning up all over the city. This including an abandoned bunker, the banks of a quiet reservoir, and multiple parks. However, the only clue they would find was from grainy surveillance footage of a lone man carrying heavy shopping bags through quiet streets. That is when they gave this killer the nickname Heavy Bagman. But what they didn't know is who he actually was or who he had murdered. The investigation that followed was absolutely relentless, and in the end, their efforts would unmask not just a horrific killer, but a parasite who continued to feed off his victim's life long after taking it. So, who is Heavy Bagman? Who was he impersonating? And what was their backstory? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and in today's video, we're diving into a case so horrifying that'll make you question your sense of trust. You see, in this world, there are givers and then there are takers, and sometimes it's the ones who take the most yet deserve it the least who end up being the most dangerous of all. We're going to dive straight into this one today, folks, so please grab yourself a coffee and sit back. This is the case of Stuart Everett. Welcome to Manchester, folks, a city that was forged in the heat of the Industrial Revolution and redefined through music, football, and an attitude as sharp as its winter rain. It's a place where old red brick mills stand guard over buzzing nightclubs, where cobbled alleys hold century-old secrets, and where the locals are equal parts frazzled and hilariously unbothered. And yes, before she messages me about it, I am including my sister in this population. By the way, a quick shout out to her for recording some of the footage which is used in this video. Thank you, Katrina. However, for all of its northern warmth and swagger, Manchester certainly does have a darker underbelly, including shadows that cling to abandoned tunnels, forgotten bunkers, and places that the city would rather not remember. And it was one of those places, more specifically the Kursel bunker, that an explorer stumbled across something truly horrifying. And I'm talking top-tier terrifying here, because what they found was a human torso wrapped in cellophane. To paint the picture for you properly, Kursel bunker has been left to rot just as tragically as the poor soul found inside it. Tucked away in the Kursel Dale area, it is so forgotten that it won't even show on Google Maps. And by the way, Kursel Dale may sound familiar to some of you older locals too, because as you might know, it was once home to one of Britain's poorest slums. Back then, life in Kursel was faced with poverty. Rats, damp and trash were all merely normal, and every complaint of bronchitis was met with a shrug. Step outside back then and you would see rows of crumbling back-to-back terraces, and alleyways piled so high with rubbish that you would barely be able to see the end. Now, it is true that Kursel really did prop up Britain's dying industrial revolution, but when that finally met its end, well, so did the area. It was in 1974 that the slum was demolished, replaced with patches of green, and then quietly forgotten about. Of course, all except for its bunker. The bunker itself was a relic from the Cold War, promising defense in any sort of nuclear attack. But now, it's just a sealed-off shell that hides Manchester's darkest secrets. And of course, that secret was an unidentified human torso.
We're investigating the discovery of human remains that were found by passers-by here at Kursel wetlands yesterday evening. We do not know the identity of the person or whether they are male or female. From forensic inquiries so far, we believe that these remains are likely to have been here for a matter of days, and it really is a tragic case. We know this will be concerning for people in the local area, and we ask anyone with concerns or any information whatsoever to speak to uniformed officers who will be in the area for a number of days. These are very early stages in what is a murder investigation and is a tragic case. We are keeping an open mind, and we do all that we can to establish the circumstances and provide answers as soon as we can. Thank you.
The grisly discovery was made on April the 4th, 2024, and let's be honest, there wasn't a shred of doubt in any detective's mind. This certainly was a homicide. After all, carving off your own torso and then hiding it separately from your limbs would be quite impressive. The problem is, they had no idea who the victim was and no suspect in sight, and so naturally, this kicked off a massive investigation that sprawled all across Greater Manchester. And as it turns out, that torso, well, it was only the beginning. As detectives dug deeper, they turned towards surveillance footage and doorbell cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was responsible. And sure enough, as more and more body parts began to appear all over the city, they spotted a man who would lead them to one of Manchester's most disturbing cases. As seen in this surveillance footage, a man appears to be casually hauling a teal-covered heavy-duty shopping bag, which disturbingly seemed to contain the same cellophane-wrapped torso that was later discovered in Kursel bunker. He carried it through a busy commercial street, blending in as if he were just running everyday errands. Dozens of people seemed to pass him by, none the wiser that they were merely meters away from human remains. Moments later, he was then caught on another camera heading towards the park, and then again behind the actual park itself. Despite combing through hours and hours of surveillance footage, they still couldn't figure out who this mysterious person was, and so, with no name to go on, they simply dubbed him the Heavy Bag Man. In the meantime, Kursel Dale was sealed off from the public as forensic teams scoured every inch of the park, but despite 2 painstaking weeks of searching, they came up empty-handed. Although they would eventually find more body parts, not a single additional one was found in that park. And when they ran the victim's DNA through the National Police database, well, unfortunately, they were met with nothing. At least that kind of confirmed that whoever the victim was, they had never actually been in any serious trouble with the police before. But of course, with no more remains, no fresh leads, and not a single additional trace of Heavy Bagman, this put officers and detectives in a very stagnant position. However, all of that would change when Manchester police found other body parts appearing all over the city. So, before we continue with this story, I think we should park it there for a while and instead focus on the people who are rather important to this one. And so, on that note, let me introduce you to Stuart Everett. Although Stuart lived in Manchester and was a Derby local through and through, he actually came from proud Polish roots. Born under the name of Roman Ziemacki, he later changed his name to Stuart Everett, a decision that would help him feel more connected to his own British upbringing. To those closest to him, he was simply known as Benny. However, don't mistake either of those name changes for shame, because it was actually far from it. And as it turns out, Stuart's parents were actually true Polish war heroes. Captured during World War II, they would then endure 2 brutal years in a Soviet concentration camp, before then finally making their escape and starting a new life in the UK. Growing up alongside his brothers and sister, Stuart would learn the importance of community and respect for one another. As an adult, he dedicated himself to public service, working for both the NHS and Department for Work and Pensions. And over those years, he would earn a reputation as a hard-working civil servant who genuinely cared about people's well-being. And although he would never marry or have his own children, it turns out that he was family to his own community instead. By his mid-60s, Stuart made the hard decision to step back from full-time work. Sadly, he began to suffer from several health complications, including a stroke which would require him to use a walking stick at all times. And so, with this setback, it was now finally time for him to kick back and relax. Fast forward to the year of 2013, and Stuart was now more devoted to his Polish community than ever before. He ran several English classes weekly, helping newly arrived Polish immigrants in Manchester not only learn the language, but also feel a sense of belonging. By now, he was living in a rented 3-bedroom house on Worsley Road in the Winton area of Salford, Manchester. And not wanting to live alone, the other 2 bedrooms were also rented out to other Polish migrants. And that is exactly how he crossed paths with 2 fellow countrymen, who were named Michael Polchowski and Marcin Majerkiewicz. Now, although Stuart lived with both Michael and Marcin, we're going to focus on that second name, because he's the main person we should be talking about. By the time Marcin moved into Stuart's house, the 2 had actually already known each other for well over a decade, with Marcin moving in around 2017 after breaking up with his partner. Now, it is worth saying here that Marcin had 2 children with this partner, and although the relationship had sadly ended, they did remain on good terms, and he would visit his children often. Now, for most of his adult life, Marcin worked in fast food restaurants, occasionally working in the Trafford Centre whenever work was available. Now, here is where it gets interesting, but it turns out that friends and neighbours would often see Stuart and Marcin together where they seemed especially close. In fact, in private emails to a friend, Stuart would even describe Marson as his partner. So, despite the massive age gap of around 25 years, there probably was some level of romance or at least intimacy going on between the two. However, what was clear is that Stuart deeply cared about Marson. In fact, he treated him with great kindness. And he wasn't just some roommate or a friend, but he was also a mentor, a confidant, and in many ways, family. Now, for the sake of this story, it's worth saying that they had their own separate bedrooms, but what is also obvious is that the bond they shared went far beyond that of ordinary housemates. However, there was a dark side to Marson too. A fascination for gore and violence aside, he was capable of doing extraordinarily horrific things, and all of that would come to light in 2024. You see, throughout 2023 and the years prior, Marson had actually dug himself a huge financial grave. He took out multiple loans and racked up more than £60,000 of debt, and every penny was spent just as quickly as he borrowed it. And when that pool of borrowed money ran dry, well, the repayments he'd promised to make never happened. Oh, and if that wasn't enough already, he'd also maxed out all of his credit cards at over £14,000. Seriously, this man must have literally thought that debt was a hobby. But instead of clawing his way back with honest work, Marson would sadly do the opposite and quit altogether, being out of work since November of 2023. And now, he was just drifting about the house with no job, plan, or desire. And sadly, in his twisted mind, a new solution emerged. Why claw his way out of debt when he could simply replace the man who'd helped him the most? And so, Marson made a decision that would stain the house forever. He would murder Stuart Everett in cold blood, take over all of his bank accounts, and squeeze every last drop from his identity. He would quite literally become his parasite. And just like that, Heavy Bag Man was born. It was sometime during the late hours of March the 27th, 2024, that Marson set his plan into motion. Stuart had settled down for the evening, watching the football match from a sofa in his bedroom as he rested in his pajamas. But Marson, he unfortunately had other plans, and with a hammer in his hand, he slowly approached Stuart from behind. It was in that moment that he struck him on the top and the back of his head at least 4 times. With each swing cracking deeper than the last, and with so much force that Stuart's skull quite literally gave way beneath it. The medical evidence that was left behind on his body painted a very grim picture. It appeared that Stuart clung to life just long enough to draw in only a few ragged breaths, all of which was confirmed by the blood that was found in his lungs. We believe that moments later, he would sadly pass away. Unfortunately, the worst was still yet to come. On the bedroom floor, and while equipped with a knife and a hacksaw, Marson then slowly started to carve Stuart into pieces. Of course, with his aim to reduce him into packages that were then small enough to carry. After the deed was done, various body parts were then meticulously wrapped, some of which were put into cling film, while others were stuffed into black bin bags. And then, over the following week, he began the grim process of disposing them all across the city. The police would later learn that he made at least 11 trips from his house, each time lugging a shopping or travel bag with Stuart's limbs inside. And while out in the public, he would then walk by hundreds of people who could have never guessed what he was actually carrying beside them. His chosen dumping grounds were the quiet corners of North Manchester and the Salford area, which of course included secluded parks, forgotten open spaces, bunkers, and the still waters around Blackleach Reservoir. And by the way, it was that reservoir where he would decide to get rid of the hacksaw too. But there was a new problem for Marson, that being the Easter weekend, which always brought crowds. With that in mind, he decided to pause his disposal process and instead store what remained of Stuart in a freezer in the home until the coast was clear. And with Marson still worried that he could eventually be caught, he decided to take his cruelty a step further by separating Stuart's face from his skull. Of course, in an effort to prevent his identity from ever being discovered. After hacking Stuart's body into pieces and then scattering him across Manchester, Marson did not stop there. In fact, he would quite literally become Stuart's parasite in every sense of the word. To begin with, he lied to the landlord and the other housemate Michael, claiming that Stuart had simply gone back to Derby and was not planning on returning. And it turns out that faking messages to people wouldn't be that hard either, because Marson actually already knew the password to Stuart's phone. And so with that said, he then started to text Stuart's own family while pretending to be him, basically saying that he had now moved out of the property and also was too unwell to take any phone calls. He then commandeered all of Stuart's bank accounts and basically bled him dry for every single penny. And if that wasn't bad enough already, he then impersonated Stuart over the phone and even slurred his voice to make it sound like a man who was recovering from a stroke. After that, he then hired a skip company with Stuart's money to basically throw all of his stuff away, and then he went after his pension scheme. Now, of course, Stuart's own family would eventually become suspicious. I mean, they hadn't even seen pictures or videos of Stuart's new home. And so, to counteract that, Marson went to an open home and then recorded the experience to make it look like Stuart now lived there instead. He would even send birthday cards to Stuart's family, creating this illusion that he was still alive and well. Not only that, but he regularly visited random ATM machines to collect cash from Stuart's bank accounts, where he would then go and spend the money on fast food like KFC. Meanwhile, back at the house, Marson worked hard to get rid of any evidence of the murder. With a skip now at his disposal, he could easily dump Stuart's belongings and anything suspicious. As already mentioned, he disposed of the hammer and the hacksaw in the local reservoir. And as for all the evidence which couldn't be moved, well, bleach and antibacterial wipes would have to do. He told the landlord that all three of them were moving out, meanwhile telling the other housemate, Michael, that the landlord had given notice to leave. He then cleared out all of Stuart's belongings, telling Michael that his family had already collected it all. However, some things are much harder to erase, and the carpet in Marson's bedroom told a very different story. Bloodstains were something that not even a rug doctor could fix. So, he cut out the stained patch entirely, before then replacing it with a piece from Stuart's own carpet. He then hid this missing patch under his bed, and, believe it or not, forgot to throw it out in the trash. His cover-up dragged on for almost an entire month, and by the time Marson was finished with his frantic cleaning, police had already made their first discovery. Of course, that being a human torso in Kursel bunker. In addition to this, detectives had also found several surveillance video clips of him carrying suspicious bags around the city. But of course, despite him having the name of Heavy Bagman, the police still, at this stage, had no idea who he was. Meanwhile, it turns out that Marson was already planning his next move, because, as it turns out, he'd started researching rental properties in Alicante in Spain. Of course, that meaning that not only was he ready to vanish abroad, but also abandon his former partner and children. Back in Salford, neighbours began to sense that something was off. Where they once saw Stuart tending to the garden or popping down to the corner shop, well, now there was only silence, and no sign of him at all. Marson thought that he had everyone fooled here, but his carefully spun web of lies was all about to fall apart, in ways that he never saw coming, and, unfortunately for him, it would all be at the very last moment. It was on April the 25th, 2024 that something remarkable happened. By now, Stuart had been dead for almost a month, and for the last 3 weeks, the police had been aware of his remains, but sadly still had no idea who he was. Despite their relentless efforts, the elusive figure that they'd nicknamed Heavy Bagman remained unidentified. However, that was all about to change, with thanks to a stroke of pure luck. Investigation Support Officer Claire Daly was walking down a quiet residential street when she happened to glance up and spot a man who looked eerily similar to Heavy Bagman. Acting fast, Claire and her colleague both alerted nearby uniformed officers, while she discreetly kept Marson in sight. She tailed him just long enough for backup to arrive, and when they did, the officers then shadowed him onto a bus, and it was there, without warning, that Marcin Majerkiewicz was in big trouble.
Down in front of you. Be inside, you're detained for the purpose of a search while we ascertain your identity, okay?
Or if you could pass me your mobile number for
Just one stand up first.
Well, this sort of group, give us a call, please.
Can you double check, please?
Try to check his pocket.
Thank you. Anybody this sort of group with a van to collect this potential customer that's coming in?
Have you got anything sharp or anything in your pockets that might hurt?
Absolutely, mate.
Okay. It's fine, don't worry, we'll just check and then...
Blast the box drop for a van
It's
for you.
definitely a mistake. 100%.
I know, I appreciate that. All we've had is information passed to us from officers investigating a serious matter as to whether you may be involved.
Yeah, but something happened and
Just stand there.
like I
Not
told
right
you.
now. Not today, but it has happened recently, okay? It's 12 minutes past 1. It's minute time. You're under arrest on suspicion of murder. Do you understand the offence? You're under arrest for the meeting time. Okay. Suspicion of murder for an incident which occurred in Salford. All right. So you were taken to police station for question regarding that.
Okay, I go with you and I answer any questions.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, no, that's...
You're searching it over. See, housemate, yeah.
Still make sure you got nothing in your waistband, right?
Do it again if you want to, but...
Right. Have a seat there, mate. What's your head?
What's your head?
And just like that, they had him. Marson was now finally in handcuffs. Once they had him, everything began to fall into place, because after realizing where he lived, they learned that his housemate Stuart had actually been missing for weeks. And of course, that would end the mysterious identity of their victim. By the way, it is actually a miracle that Officer Daly spotted Marson when she did, because as it turns out, Marson was going to move out of that property later that day. And with them searching for places to live in Spain, well, that would have made things a whole lot harder for officers. After a quick sweep of the property and then a couple rounds of DNA testing, officers would learn everything they needed to know. And sadly, Stuart was in fact confirmed to be the victim. When they began to inspect Marson's bedroom, they found a few horrible clues. For example, the carpet that lay beneath would tell its own story. It turns out that Stuart's blood had soaked right through the underlay and deep into the floorboards. Under a UV light, more blood was found, and in the fridge freezer, DNA matching Stuart was also confirmed. This was only the beginning, by the way, because under a UV light, more blood was discovered. Meanwhile, downstairs and in the fridge freezer, DNA matching Stuart was found. Now, you would think that getting caught red-handed would probably crack someone wide open, but Marcin, not at all. In fact, he was actually stone cold and said nothing in the interrogation room. So naturally, the search would then fall to the boots on the ground, and over the following days, detectives combed through rivers, woodlands, urban wastelands, and reservoirs, and in the end found 19 separate crime scenes. However, in the end, only 1/3 of Stuart's body was discovered, which means, even to this day, more than 2/3 of him are still out there waiting to be discovered. Detectives would eventually learn that Marson had circled Blackleach Reservoir several times. Deep beneath the water, divers dredged up a hacksaw, and on its blade, Stuart's blood was discovered clear as day. But perhaps the most chilling discovery was still yet to come, because in a stroke of good luck, divers would find all 4 parts of Stuart's skull. It had been broken into 4 separate fragments during the attack, before then being scattered into different parts of that large, murky reservoir. Anyway, when it came to Marson's trial, things were not looking good. A forensic pathologist reconstructed Stuart's skull, before then confirming what investigators had already believed, that he had been murdered by multiple blows to the head with an object that was reminiscent to the hammer that Marson had purchased. And as for his defense, well, that didn't stand a chance. Not only was his DNA all over the murder weapon, but it was also sprinkled over dozens of other articles of evidence. Detectives pored over more than 2,000 hours of surveillance footage, collected over 3,000 exhibits, and took statements from more than 450 witnesses. And obviously, nearly everything pointed straight back towards him. Oh, and here's a picture of the sofa under UV light. Not only was it drenched in Stuart's blood, but Marson's DNA was all over it too. I mean, the man even paid to have that blood-soaked sofa hidden away in a storage unit, hoping that no one would ever find it. And how about that birthday card that he had sent to Stuart's family, pretending to be him still alive and well? Yeah, the handwriting was confirmed to belong to Marson, and the paper itself was covered with his grubby fingerprints. The prosecution would also highlight many additional details, such as purchasing a hacksaw and a hammer in advance, and the messages he had sent on behalf of Stuart in the days following his murder. The judge would also express his repulsion towards Marson, recognizing that he showed an extremely distasteful willingness and perhaps even enthusiasm to butchering his friend's body. Even throughout his trial, Marson denied having any involvement in Stuart's murder. In fact, he would still call it one giant misunderstanding. But the jury saw right through his lies, and in March of 2025, and following a 3-week trial, they officially found him guilty of murder. They determined that the motive was plain and simple greed, because Martin had racked up an irrecoverable amount of debt, and so he thought he could simply kill Stuart and then siphon all his money. As a result, Marson was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years behind bars, which thankfully means that at the very earliest, he won't be free again until 2058, and by then, Marson's going to be 76 years old. This is a deeply sad story about a man who gave so much to his community, only to be betrayed and then exploited by someone he trusted. Although Stuart wasn't in the best of health when he died, he had never lost his zest for life. He was known for being jolly, friendly, and mild-mannered, a caring man who remained very close to his family right until the end. Friends describe him as a gentle and sociable soul with an upbeat personality, and one of his friends put it quite simply, that he was the kind of man that everyone got on with, someone who was easy to talk to and always ready with a warm welcome. In a statement, Stuart's family said, "Even though it has been almost 12 months, we are still haunted by Benny's death, which has now been made even more painful knowing the lengths that were taken to plan it. It is truly difficult to put into words how much he meant to us and how much we will all miss him." Stuart was a true historian and collector, and unfortunately, with him holding all of his family's old paperwork, well, all of that was lost when Marson threw all of it into the skip. He threw away decades of wedding photos, birth certificates, memories, and memoirs. And so it turns out that not only is Marson a horrible killer, but also a vile parasite who denied an entire family of their heritage. I mean, the man quite literally went to a KFC after dumping a body part in the park. Who even does that? It remains eerily unclear if other parts of Stuart will ever be found, because even to this day, Marson remains uncooperative. But perhaps through time, the monster will eventually change his mind. After all, he has a very long time to think about it. I don't think there is much to debate in this story because the evidence available is very cut and dry. But saying that, I would love to know what you think about this one, because the story is absolutely wild. So with that said, please share your thoughts in the comments section down below, because I genuinely like to read them. I can't really think of anything else to say here, so I guess that's the end of the video. On that note, thank you so much for making it this far, folks. I really do appreciate you being here. I'm going to keep to this weekly schedule, probably for at least the foreseeable future, so on that note, I'll see you again same time next week. Of course, until that moment arrives, remember to look after yourselves, look after each other, and of course, stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.